Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
I just had to get out of my car and start walking. The smoke is so bad.
It was nothing like this.
A hurricane of fires tear through parts of Los Angeles as powerful winds fuel the flames.
There were flames on either side of us.
Plus,
so he thinks that Canada is just trying to prove a point to the current U.S. government.
a convicted January 6th rioter who came to BC seeking asylum and hoping for a pardon from Donald Trump has now been arrested and...
Could Concord actually, put in an elementary school?
Extremely transformative for the city.
Undeveloped for decades, a plan is now unveiled for prime waterfront real estate around Vancouver's False Creek.
I like the area as it is right now.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. We start in California, where 6 wildfires are raging in and around Los Angeles. Thousands of people escaped burning homes amid powerful winds and massive plumes of smoke. And more have been ordered to leave the area. As Bel Puri reports, at least 5 people have been killed and more than 1,000 structures wiped out.
It's a hurricane of fire. The winds are powerful, the flames are ferocious. The rush to safety is crucial.
There were flames on either side of us. The car was very quickly getting smoky. We had wet towels over our faces.
Multiple fires across some of California's most exclusive neighborhoods are 0% under control.
We watched the mountain go, and we tried to, watch the embers come, and there wasn't many of them until houses down here started catching. And then it started coming over to this block. And tell you, I've been here 47 years. I grew up on this block. I saw the other altitude fires, and it was nothing like this.
The largest of the fires broke out Tuesday morning near Pacific Palisades. 30,000 people have been forced from their homes.
And we got in the car to go, and then all the cars were abandoned, so I had nowhere to go, so I just had to get out of my car and start walking. The smoke is so bad.
Up to 10,000 households and 13,000 structures are threatened.
There's trees down that have crushed cars and on top of houses, and the fire line's 8 blocks from our home.
California has declared a state of emergency.
The National Weather Service has predicted a continued red flag weather event with strong winds and low humidities, placing all residents of Los Angeles County in danger.
The fires were sparked by a combination of dry conditions and dangerously high-speed winds.
Prolonged droughts have meant that the ecosystems are primed for fire, and when you get hot, dry, windy conditions plus an ignition, the Santa Ana winds blow from the desert towards the ocean, and they carry with them fires when they do start.
By midday, the Los Angeles fires had already burned nearly 93 square kilometers of property, and the winds and flames show no signs of letting up. Bel Puri, CBC News, Vancouver.
A man convicted and sentenced for his role in the January 6th attack on Washington, D.C. has now been arrested in BC. The CBC's Rob Easton joins us with more. Rob, why did he come here in the first place?
Dan, Anthony Vo was found guilty and sentenced to 9 months in jail for his role in the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol in 2021. Rather than reporting to prison in June, he decided to flee to Canada, ending up in Whistler. He made an asylum claim here, asserting he was being politically persecuted in the U.S. for his role in January 6th. But then on January 6th of this year, members of the Canada Border Services Agency arrested him in Whistler. The CBSA says it has no record of Vo entering Canada by any legal port of entry, and that it has a legal obligation to remove all foreign nationals who are inadmissible to Canada. Vo's lawyer argues this is the latest move in a politically motivated.
So he thinks that Canada is just trying to prove a point to the current U.S. government to say, oh, we are not condoning your political opponent or stuff like that. So that's what he thinks. He thinks the whole thing is unfair to him.
Rob, what is next for Vo?
Well, earlier in the day, the CBSA ruled Vo will remain in custody at least for the next week. His lawyer says he'll have another detention hearing on January 15th. The lawyer also tells me the agency gave many reasons to keep him in custody, saying Vo had crossed illegally into Canada and that he was avoiding a prison sentence in the United States.
Rob Easton, thanks very much. Police say 2 bodies have been found inside burned vehicle, allegedly torched in an Abbotsford park last week. Officers say a burning red Mitsubishi Outlander was found on January 3rd on a Forest Service road in Sumas Mountain Regional Park. Inside that charred SUV, police say they discovered what appeared to be human remains. They now say they know who owns the SUV and are trying to establish a timeline of events leading up to the fire and deaths. As flu and RSV cases rise in BC, masking is once again mandatory in all healthcare facilities. BC's Health Ministry says as of this week, everyone in healthcare facilities, staff, patients, visitors, and volunteers must wear medical masks in areas where patients are actively seeking care. The ministry says it's a temporary measure to protect people during respiratory illness season, and masks will go hand in hand with other infection control practices. 5 years after Flight PS 752 was shot down over Tehran, BC is working to build a new monument to honor the dead. 176 passengers and crew were killed when the Iranian regime fired missiles at the plane shortly after it took off. 55 of the victims were Canadian citizens, 30 permanent residents. David Eby says the province is working with the city of North Vancouver to establish a monument. In 2023, Canada, Sweden, Ukraine, and the UK filed a case against Iran in the International Court of Justice, seeking justice for victims' families. Justin Trudeau's decision to resign and pause Parliament has BC's Premier and Attorney General worried. As Katie DeRosa explains, the move means key bills could be dead in the water.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has prorogued Parliament while the Liberal Party searches for someone to replace him. The impact in BC is uncertainty around federal funding for housing and border security and concerns about bills that have died on the order paper.
Everything that did not receive royal assent until now dies, and it has to be essentially reintroduced as though these bills never existed.
Most concerning for BC's Attorney General is the Online Harms Bill. It aims to hold social media platforms accountable for content that appears on their site.
That one dying and not becoming law in Canada is really steps us backwards.
Under Bill C-63, platforms would have to remove content that sexualizes children or victims of sexual violence within 24 hours of a complaint being filed. If they don't, they could be fined $10 million. Carol Todd has been a staunch advocate for better protections for youth online. In 2012, her daughter Amanda took her own life after she was sexually extorted.
The young people in Canada deserve those types of protections. And when you are a mother like Carol Todd, who's been advocating for decades for better protections online, to see it go down like this, I'm sure is devastating for her.
Let's say there's an election after March 24th. I highly doubt that bill comes back in its current form.
Premier David Eby, meanwhile, is worried that promised federal cash has evaporated.
I'll be blunt and frank in saying that we saw a lot of announcements of funding that weren't delivered to British Columbia, whether or not the federal government was sitting. So we're prepared for that.
That includes $2 billion promised by Trudeau to top up the BC Builds program, which is meant to fund more housing, and $1.3 billion announced in December to strengthen border security nationwide in response to Donald Trump's tariff threat. Ottawa is also footing the bill for most of BC's affordable childcare program. One childcare advocate says she's confident that federal program will not be on the chopping block.
So it becomes almost incomprehensible that any new leader would want to double or triple or quadruple childcare fees for families.
Still, opposition parties have vowed to try and bring down the governing Liberals and trigger an election as soon as Parliament resumes. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
BC Conservative leader John Rustad is planning an event on Thursday to, quote, release information about concerns emerging from the fall provincial election. Rustad will be joined by Hanveer Singh Randhawa, the party's candidate in the riding of Surrey-Guildford. It went to the BC NDP's Gary Begg by 22 votes. That result confirmed by a judicial recount. Elections BC says it has received a complaint from Randhawa. That is under review. Immigrating to Canada is a lengthy process full of complicated paperwork. It's why some people rely on the services of immigration consultants. A new poll commissioned by CBC News shows more newcomers are choosing consultants over lawyers. But as Yasmin Ghanea explains, experts say that can come with risks.
Andres Barrios says he's restarting his life in Mexico. He had to leave Canada in 2021 after he alleges he and other migrant workers were scammed by Vancouver immigration consultant Lisa Lucian.
We felt anguish. We felt very angry. We felt frustrated.
Barrios is the lead plaintiff in a proposed class action lawsuit that alleges he and dozens of migrant workers paid Lucian thousands for an allegedly fake COVID-related work program. Lucian denies the allegations. They have not been proven in court. Lucian declined an interview. Her lawyer spoke to CBC News on her behalf, but declined a broadcast interview, but described it all as a profound misunderstanding. She said Lucian did her job filing immigration applications, but that there's no guarantee they would be accepted. After getting complaints from migrant workers in 2020, the College of Immigration and Citizenship Consultants suspended Lucian indefinitely in 2022 while it investigated. Lucian's lawyer says she hopes the college lifts the suspension once the investigation is complete. Lucian is also facing 3 other lawsuits. In one, Mexican citizen Diana Plasencia alleges Lucian promised to hire her as a data analyst, a job that could lead to permanent residency or PR. But instead, Plasencia allegedly worked on a construction site, which would not result in a PR, says her lawyer.
That would be unskilled work, generally speaking. So there's a knock matrix where skilled work is defined by your job title and job duties. And so if you fall into a job title or job duties that's unskilled, it's very unlikely to lead you to be able to get PR.
In a counterclaim, Lucian says Plasencia failed to provide certification to prove she can do the analyst role, and so she was not automatically placed in that job. The allegations from former clients are part of a bigger problem with the industry, according to this organization that supports newcomers.
It isn't a function of consultants per se, but it's more of a function of people representing another person for money, and then that money gets in the way.
It comes as more people are choosing consultants over lawyers. A new survey commissioned by CBC News asked about 1,500 newcomers to Canada about their experiences and found 33% used immigration consultants, while 16% used lawyers. Owen Logan, who represents several of Lucian's alleged victims, says the regulatory body for consultants has been too slow to act, saying it took the college about 30 months to suspend Lucian after receiving complaints. She was able to keep practicing during those months. Logan says this was too long.
There's very lax enforcement of the rules. The rules on paper are good. There's a very good code of conduct, but the actual enforcement of those rules has been lacking.
In a statement, the college said its goal is to handle complaints in a manner that is fair, efficient, and in the public interest, adding that procedural fairness requires due diligence and careful review of the unique elements of each complaint. The college's 2024 annual report says it closed about 1,300 cases. There are still roughly 1,500 open cases. Yasmin Ghanea, CBC News, Vancouver.
Time for a look at our BC weather forecast, and Riley Lachuk is here with the goods. Hello, Riley.
Hey, Dan. Looking at conditions above seasonal for many parts of the province today. A couple of things that I wanted to point out. First off, a record in Fort Nelson today, just about 5 degrees. That record from 1967 at 2.2 degrees. And the Canadian hotspot today, Prince Rupert at just about 10 degrees this afternoon. A mix of sun and clouds for much of the province today. A bit of a roller coaster coming in your long-range forecast. 1 degree in Vancouver overnight. Some patchy fog, and we're looking at a high of 6 tomorrow. I'll have your long-range when I come back.
Sounds good. Thanks, Riley.
You're welcome.
It's a plan that reimagines Falls Creek. Coming up, Concord's vision to build thousands of more homes. That's next. Some of Canada's best hockey players are taking the ice at Rogers Arena in what some say is a sign of a changing sport. The Professional Women's Hockey League, also known as the PWHL, is holding a game in Vancouver for the first time. As Liam Britton shows us, fans hope more games will follow.
I'm here outside Rogers Arena, where a sold-out crowd is just starting to stream in to check out some of the best that women's hockey has to offer.
Super exciting. It's a super unique experience to have, and it's definitely quite special.
Vancouver's first PWHL game will see the Montreal Victoire take on the Toronto Scepters. The match features players famed for representing Canada internationally: Anne-Renee Debienne, Marie-Philippe Poulin, Sarah Nurse, Renata Fast, to name a few. These rosters have over 24 Olympic medals between them. And for some fans, especially women and girls, they say tonight's game matters beyond the final score.
I think it just matters because we'll have a bunch of opportunities for girls like us to play when we're older and aspire to be like them when we're older too.
And while Vancouver has no true home team tonight, the league has played games in neutral sites before. Last year, Detroit and Pittsburgh hosted games. And this year, 9 cities, including Vancouver, will hold PWHL games.
We're really interested in the growth opportunities for the PWHL, and we're talking to a number of markets and cities, and this tour is an opportunity for us to experience cities, to find the right partners, to see where there are opportunities for us to expand.
So, could Vancouver get a team of its own? The league's not ruling it out, and it's something the fans say should happen.
I mean, it makes a difference. It shows that women can do just as much as men can do when it comes to sports and really anything.
Hopes that this game could lead to many more. Liam Britton, CBC News, Vancouver.
A big swath of Vancouver's waterfront could look very different in the next few years. Concord Pacific is now sharing its plan to build thousands of new homes in northeast Falls Creek. But as Mira Baines reports, it all depends on those viaducts coming down.
This is the future of Concord Landing, on a prized piece of waterfront land along northeast Falls Creek. Undeveloped for decades, it's on part of the former Expo 86 lands between the Plaza of Nations and Science World. It's basically empty parking lots sandwiched by Vancouver's viaducts.
It's been a 30-year venture on developing the Expo land since the 1988 purchase of Falls Creek property.
Concord Pacific Senior Vice President of Development Peter Webb says his company will be submitting a formal rezoning inquiry to the city. That could come over the next month. The company says the proposal is inspired by Portofino, an Italian fishing village, but will feature 12 towers.
A European-oriented shopping village of maybe over 50-plus small owner-operator style retail and restaurants. And then above that, a housing project that would provide thousands of units, potentially 5,000 homes.
But for the developer to bring in added density, the viaducts need to come down. And the question of who pays for the demolition, last estimated at $438 million, is still unresolved. There are questions over whether other levels of government will pitch in to help, as well as the developer.
Extremely transformative for the city, just because it takes a portion of the downtown, which is probably one of the least desirable areas, and it would turn it into one of the most desirable areas.
People on the seawall near the site weighed in.
To me, the area is a bit disorganized, and Vancouver does have a density issue.
I think we need to have more space for people in the city to live. And I think it's great if they're going to put investment into the infrastructure around that with parks and more walking spaces.
Could Concord actually, put in an elementary school or a senior high school to support the families that live here?
I like the area as it is right now. It's a nice walk without more towers being put in.
A lot of unknowns, but one thing is for sure, no shovels in the ground for at least the next 2 to 3 years. Mira Baines, CBC News, Vancouver.
There's the sun breaking through the clouds in the city of Port Alberni on Vancouver Island earlier in the day. It started off with fog and cloud, as you can see, but there is more of that sunshine to come. Riley Lachuk will have your BC-wide weather forecast as we hit the halfway point of this week. Stay with us. More reaction now after Donald Trump threatened to use, quote, economic force to make Canada the 51st U.S. state. Federal officials here say it is not funny anymore. And U.S. Democrats see it as the president-elect trying to distract from his economic promises. More now from Chris Reyes.
Yet another image on President-elect Donald Trump's social media feed, sending a clear message of his intentions for Canada. The post comes after Trump doubled down on his pitch to make Canada the 51st state at a press conference from his Florida home on Tuesday. The reaction has been coming in fast and furious. The Liberals are punching back hard.
When President-elect Trump talks, we need to listen, and we need to take him very seriously. I never take his threats lightly. At the same time, we can't take the bait. I think we're extremely strong as a country. I think our economy is strong. I think our people are strong, and I think we will never back down.
Ontario's Premier, Doug Ford, has been hitting the American talk circuit to push back against the idea, but also to propose a stronger union between the U.S. and Canada.
I love the U.S., I love Americans, and I get it. You know, President-elect Trump is a real estate tycoon. He's made billions, but that property's not for sale. As simple as that.
Trump supporters are not letting up. Elon Musk responded to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's post, saying there isn't a snowball's chance in hell that Canada would ever be a part of the U.S. Musk wrote, "Girl, you're not the governor of Canada anymore, so it doesn't matter what you say." One Democrat called Trump's proposals a distraction.
We are not going to take Greenland by force. We are not going to get Canada as the 51st state. We are not going to rename the Gulf of Mexico. So why is the president talking about that? What we're talking about here are things that are never going to happen. They're shiny things. They're little bits of tin foil and fireworks designed to distract us.
Trump has threatened massive tariffs on Canadian goods if Canada doesn't become a part of the U.S. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
Now, outgoing top U.S. diplomat Antony Blinken says the world should not waste a lot of time on Donald Trump's remarks about Greenland. On Tuesday, the president-elect said he would not rule out using military force to take over the Danish territory. Chris Brown has more on the reaction to his comments.
Donald Trump says he wants to make Greenland's riches American property. And like Canadians, people there are struggling to understand how serious to take his threat. Would you like to become an American? Asked the reporter. Not me. I don't want that. You can visit us, she says, but nothing else.
We need it for national security. That's for the free world.
Trump stunned the world by suggesting Denmark should turn the giant island over. And if not, he could take it by force. Arriving in Copenhagen Wednesday, Greenland's PM Mutebe Oliu called Trump's comments serious and said Greenland belongs to Greenlanders. Denmark's foreign minister gave a cautious response. I don't think we're in a foreign policy crisis, said Lars Rasmussen. I see a president on his way into the White House who has a heightened focus on the Arctic. But Trump's remarks implying using force against a NATO ally and unilaterally redrawing national borders have rattled Europeans. Every country must adhere to the inviolability of borders, said Germany's chancellor. Trump's son, Don Jr., flew into Nuuk for a few hours on Tuesday, presumably to underscore his dad's seriousness. This Danish analyst says until Trump actually makes an official move, caution from the Danish government is likely wise.
They've been extremely diplomatic in their response and emphasizing that we need to keep calm and maintain friendships and alliances and not disrupt them.
Greenland's 57,000 mainly indigenous people were already in the midst of an emotional debate over their island's future, with many determined to end its colonial status. But few appear to consider swapping Danish rulers for American ones as a serious option. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Still to come, at least 2 people have been killed and more than 1,000 structures destroyed as those devastating fires tear through the Los Angeles area. We'll bring you the very latest next. Returning now to our top story, Los Angeles is surrounded by numerous fast and fierce wildfires. 6 major blazes are burning. The Palisades fire is the largest, forcing more than 40,000 people to flee. At least 5 people are dead, 2 of them killed in the nearby Eaton fire, burning closer to Pasadena. The CBC's Aaron Collins brings us more from Santa Monica on the edge of the Palisades blaze.
The Los Angeles area under siege, surrounded by fire.
I'm trying to find my dad.
Tens of thousands of people scrambling to get out. Others staying put to fight for their homes.
The fire was basically encircling us. You could hear explosions all around us.
It's really scary when you can see the flames coming up over the houses 2 blocks away.
But leaving, not easy.
I was running up to the 3rd story, 2nd story, carrying people down, just picking them up because we do have a lot of wheelchair people in here.
Resources and manpower on the ground stretched paper thin. More than 1 million people without power, too. In some areas, crews running out of water to beat back the flames.
Mother Nature's in charge here, and we're just reacting to it.
This fire fanned by winds not seen in this area for a decade, overnight reaching 160 kilometers an hour.
We lost a lot of things. As partners, smaller photographs, and my grandpa's antique chest.
Those losses not lost on officials here. A federal state of emergency now in effect.
So over 1,000 structures already that have been destroyed, 100,000+ people that have been evacuated, lives lost, traditions, lifestyles, places torn asunder.
In less than 2 days, these fires have already left their mark. More than 1,000 buildings destroyed. The first deaths starting to be reported.
Aaron Collins in Santa Monica, California. As you just heard, more than 100,000 people have been asked to flee. Many more are standing by assessing the situation closely. This is the case for Maggie Langrick. She is originally from Vancouver. She now calls Los Angeles home, and she joins us. Maggie, we understand you've been very busy in the past few minutes, packing, getting ready. What is happening around you right now?
Yeah, well, I was worried that this was going to be a dumb little interview because I've been sitting on my thumbs all day just going like, oh, this is not affecting me. I'm not really involved. It's, 10 miles away. But about 20 minutes ago, my neighbors and my phone blew up with texts from friends who are on those various apps watching for, alerts and things. And apparently the fire is now in Runyon Canyon, which is in the Hollywood Hills and about 2 miles from my home. So neighbors are packing their car. I'm looking around and wishing that I had been a little more alarmist earlier in the day. Like you don't want to overreact, but you don't want to underreact.
Are you able to smell smoke? Are you hearing sirens? What's happening right now?
Yeah, so I've been smelling smoke all day. I went for a walk this morning and the sky is looks like the apocalypse and, it smells like a campfire everywhere you go. So you kind of just chalk it up to that's happening across town. And, your concern goes for the people that are directly involved. And, I've been feeling really sheltered from it. I can hear sirens and I can hear helicopters, which in a way is a good sign because it means that the helicopters are able to fly again. Earlier in the day and last night, I really noticed that I wasn't hearing helicopters. And I think that that's partly because the winds were so high. I don't think that they were able to fly. Hearing helicopters in LA is a very, sort of almost like a daily event. So they're kind of notable when they're not present.
We know the mayor of Los Angeles has been warning people they must be ready to evacuate. You've not been ordered to leave. We understand you live in Beechwood Canyon, near that Hollywood sign.
Yeah,
what is your
I live
plan?
in Beechwood Canyon, directly under the Hollywood sign. And what that means is that I'm in a residential area that's adjacent to a large wilderness park. The Hollywood sign and Griffith Observatory are in Griffith Park. I think it's 600 acres of brushland and, beautiful hiking trails, which I enjoy every weekend. And so where we are, we're surrounded by concrete streets, but there's also a giant tinderbox just up the hill from here.
For people watching this in California, in LA, but beyond and here in Canada, what do you want friends and family to know and understand about the situation there?
It's one of those things where when you see it I've been watching the news all day long. And when you see it on the news, it just feels like it's literally everywhere, but it isn't. There are large swaths of the city, like I said, where it's kind of business as normal. I mean, an hour and a half ago, I went to the grocery store and people were just standing in line and buying food. It wasn't like that panic buying that we saw in the early days of the pandemic. So I guess what I want friends and family to know back home is that it isn't like that sort of hellscape everywhere you turn. It is localized. It is dreadful for the people in the communities that are directly affected. And, it looks like, some of my neighbors are now to be counted in those numbers, but it's not everywhere. The other thing that I really want to say is thank God for local news. I've been glued to Spectrum One News all day. I watch it all the time. I'm often watching the national news, but it's times like this when you really realize first responders, and that includes reporters and journalists like yourself, just being out there in the field. We absolutely rely on those agencies and on local news, on local journalism to tell us what to do and what's happening.
Maggie Langrick, we appreciate your time. Please stay safe, and we may check in with you later on. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
Time for our BC-wide weather forecast with Riley Laychuk. And Riley, I see you have the map up there of what's happening in and around the Los Angeles area. What's the latest?
Yeah, I thought we'd dip south very quickly here before we get to your BC weather forecast. I wanted to touch on the winds very quickly because look at some of these numbers here through parts of Southern California, 100 kilometer an hour. When you start to see some of these blues and these reds, these are some of those very, very strong wind gusts up to 90, 100 kilometers an hour to situate you downtown LA right here, Santa Monica, just a little up the coast. A couple of things at play here because of that. So we have this area of high pressure just south of the international border in the United States in this area of low pressure in Mexico. Those are interacting with each other and pushing some of this very strong wind over the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And what that does is really compresses that air as it moves through some of those valleys, some of those canyons, and really pushes some of that very strong wind toward the coast. And that's why we're seeing some of these very volatile and very strong wind gusts that are leading to some of these devastating fires. Looks like tomorrow will be another windy day, but we are looking at conditions improving as we get toward the weekend. All right, our forecast looking back north of the border here, starting with a mainly cloudy sky tomorrow. No, a bit of sun later in the day today. We will start to see that building back in as we get into Thursday. Our next weather maker, an area of low pressure off of the Alaskan Panhandle. This will bring mainly a rain event to coastal regions, inland, and some of the higher elevations as we get through Thursday into Friday, looking at mainly a snow event. So for Metro Vancouver, this is definitely mainly a rain event, but certainly the more inland and the higher up you go, the more likely it is that we'll see some of this falling as snow as we get later Friday into Saturday as we start to see a little bit of sunshine. So in terms of rainfall, we are looking at some pretty high amounts up the north coast, 45 millimeters in Bella Coola. I'm thinking more like 10 to 15 for Metro Vancouver, and along the south coast of Vancouver Island as we get through the day on Friday and tapering off as we get into Saturday. Your temperatures for tomorrow, for Thursday, looking like this. Terrace at 5, Prince George 3, looking at a 7 in Victoria, and cooler conditions, albeit a bit more seasonal into the interior 2s for Kamloops and Kelowna. Your long range looking like this. There's that rain I mentioned for Friday, 7 degrees, 6 mainly cloudy, some peaks of sunshine as we get through into Sunday. A bit more substantial clearing Sunday into Monday, Dan, and then we get back into a chance of showers again as we get Tuesday before a little more sun into Wednesday. And temperatures actually fairly seasonal for this time of the year all around.
Okay, sounds good. Riley, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Now, as the Los Angeles area faces the devastating wildfires, we're taking a look back to 2023, when the CBC's Anita Bath traveled to Northern California, the epicenter of fire damage in the U.S. that year, to see how people were adapting and rebuilding with fireproof homes. Have a look.
So this flame is 1,500 degrees Celsius?
Yes, that's right.
An experiment in the future of construction, pitting one material against another. The result is almost instant.
So see here how flames come up here. Nothing.
The wood block on the right catches fire in a matter of seconds. The other one is virtually unscathed. So the question is, if you live somewhere with a wildfire risk, which do you want your house to be made of?
The one you probably picked uses a 10,000-year-old technique.
So it should be sticky, and it should not fall apart by itself.
So it's really simple. It smells like dirt, it looks like dirt,
yes,
feels like dirt.
That's because it is dirt, mixed with a chemical stabilizer or cement to make it water resistant. Researchers at the University of California, Davis are studying compressed earth block construction with the hope that you can extract the material for free from the site you're building on.
The idea is that you can rent a machine like this to build your house.
Yes.
So somebody does have to get their hands a little dirty.
Yeah.
About a minute later, the machine produces these.
And then it's gonna make block out of it.
Strong enough for a 2-story building, says Dr. Nitin Kumar, and affordable because of the material involved.
It is not even the fire resistant, it is non-combustible.
It's not fire resistant, it's fireproof, windproof, earthquake-proof.
Yes.
That's a tall order for this brick.
Yes.
But you're confident in it.
Yes, yes.
The idea is still in its infancy, but it's part of a growing body of science around building homes that can withstand what climate change is throwing our way. To find out more, we've come deep into the mountains of Northern California, where crews are working to build what they call a fully wildfire-resilient home. Its design may not be everyone's cup of tea, but for those already devastated by disaster, safety is first and foremost.
Vern, you're building these Q cabins, these houses. You're not saying they're 100% fireproof, but sort of.
Right, we don't really use that word. What we do is we build a structure that is 100% non-combustible.
So this is all...
Vern Sneed uses steel as the main construction material on his Quonset huts. Instead of hammering nails into wood, the house is welded together. Even the framing avoids conventional materials that can catch fire.
So this is called rock-on.
In favor of this.
And it is a layer of concrete board, a layer of insulation, and a layer of concrete board. And so both sides of this are resistant to fire.
So if you were to take a blowtorch to this, to the steel, what would happen?
You would find that it does not catch on fire.
None of Sneed's Quonset huts have been tested in an actual wildfire, but steel only melts at very high temperatures and doesn't spread flames. When the house that originally sat here was flattened by a blaze in 2019, a similar Quonset garage on the property was the only structure on the entire hillside left standing. Enough evidence for the owners to call Sneed days later to start their rebuild.
A Quonset hut being a curve, if the fire is approaching the curve, the building is fading away from the fire. So that's a real advantage when the fire is approaching a building, to have the building sloping away. We don't show an overhang. We have an overhang, but it's all steel. So there is no soffit venting, no way for any fire to get into an attic.
The cost, he says, is pretty similar to a regular build while being mold and insect free too.
I mean, it sounds like the perfect place to live. No termites.
So why aren't more people building like this?
You know, this is Northern California, number one. We have a huge wood industry. Wood is relatively inexpensive here, so it's hard to compete. But at the same time, what is the cost of a house that, that burns down and the rebuilding of it?
A question people in regions at risk of wildfire all over North America are grappling with.
We're heading now to look at some more ways that people are building fire-resilient homes. Northern California is no stranger to wildfires. It has seen several in the last decade that have destroyed communities, including the town of Paradise. A lot of people in the area believe it's a matter of when, not if, another fire comes through and ravages another town, so they're vowing to be prepared.
Heavenly Father, please help us.
The Camp Fire leveled the town in 2018, killing 85 people and destroying almost 19,000 buildings. Most of them were older and built before any sort of wildfire standards had been introduced in California. Today, just 10% of what burned has been rebuilt, but the town now has some of the strictest fire building codes in the U.S.
The Paradise Camp Fire wrecked our world, burned my house down, took everything from us in a blink of an eye.
Flames tore through Gary Ledbetter's home just 10 days after he and his wife had moved in. Refusing to ever be a victim again, he's taken drastic measures in the new construction on his old site, setting another example for communities at risk.
Anything that's a weak point on this envelope of the building is an entry point for a ruthless fire.
Ledbetter has gone above and beyond the paradise and state regulations for building in a wildfire zone, earning his property a first-of-its-kind designation from the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. IBHS spent more than a decade testing materials and designs against a wall of embers, allowing researchers to create a standard for what they call a wildfire-prepared home.
And I see a sprinkler up there.
Yep, I have a sprinkler. I have a network of sprinklers on the rooftop.
This home is built far beyond what's now considered safe, with the highest standard in fire-resistant roofing and those sprinklers mounted on top. Vents stopping embers from getting into the attic, a 3-layer stucco siding, and double-pane windows. There's also a large amount of space between his house and anything that can catch fire. He's even got the smallest details covered.
See that wrapping around that pipe? This is fireproof material, and this is what they use on the exhaust pipes of motorcycles. That's not a requirement.
But it all comes back to how much this costs. Ledbetter knows not everyone can afford to do all of this. He says governments need to ante up to help.
Policy. Go for policy. I guarantee you, if the government could say, I'll give you this much money if you qualify to replace these windows, replace the siding, do something to make your house more resilient. That is cheaper than letting it burn and then losing a whole township. It's cheaper to proactively invest in people's homes.
Most Western states do have some sort of grant to help people retrofit their houses, but Canada is far behind, despite wiped out communities in BC and Alberta and 150 homes lost this year in Nova Scotia. Protection is a growing concern as we experience our worst wildfire season in recent memory. While many Canadian cities have strengthened building codes for new homes, most people live in older ones, and without incentives to harden existing properties, there are big risks.
For whatever reason, we just haven't adopted or developed a program. Maybe cost.
Wildland fire ecologist Bob Gray says that's a problem because Canada's wildfires hit rural areas the hardest, where residents are typically older and on a fixed income.
Right now, it's sort of wishful thinking that we'll fully fire smart our communities without some type of financial program, because the reality is it's expensive. And a lot of people just can't afford to do it.
He proposes a cost share program based on income or the government fully funding it. Worried if that doesn't happen, the toll will be catastrophic as climate change increases the number, size, and frequency of wildfires.
What's your fear if we don't do it?
We're going to lose communities. And not just lose communities, we'll have a mass casualty event. That's what myself and most of my fire colleagues worry about the most. Years like this, if we don't do this in a big way, people will die.
Until things change, many will remain at risk on both sides of the border. For now, some just hope to be an example to help save homes and lives.
A sea creature that lives at the bottom of the ocean has a very busy schedule, don't you know? After the break, we take a look at how Belinda takes a full day to sneeze. A 4-year time lapse from the sea floor of BC is giving insight into the surprisingly busy life of an inanimate animal. Here's Belinda the sponge.
This is an animal that doesn't cringe quickly. Over the course of a day, you will see essentially an equivalent of a sigh or an annoyance. What's really amazing to me is that in the fall, it would sort of slowly get smaller and shrink down and hardly moved at all for the next 2 months until come late February, early March, it starts to start expanding again and bouncing. And this happened for all 3 winters that we were able to watch it. It's a hive of activity down there. We start to see patterns, and those patterns tell us that when there's lots of stuff in the water, plankton, probably things that it's feeding on, it's very active. And when there's very little of that in the winter months, it's not active at all. You see lingcod coming up and resting against it, lots of little snails, lots of little crabs. At the end, there's an anemone that clambers up on top, and there's a sea slug, a nudibranch, that actually sits on it and eats a whole bunch of it.
Classic nudibranch. Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC GM, our free app, as well as on YouTube and, of course, our website, cbc.ca/BC. We will have your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the National. Good night.